was invited by a group of schools in London to do some research into what they needed to do to recruit and develop their middle leaders across the trust. And they were looking for consistency and quality in their middle leaders and senior leaders, so that somebody could work in one school and then transfer into another school and be assured of being at a similar level. So we were looking at two things. We were looking at their development needs, but we were also looking at how could we ensure consistency. So we started off by using the WIGL itself at different levels. So for the middle leaders, we were using a middle leader version, usually subject leader or year group leader model. And then assistant head and deputy heads, and we even looked at a couple of heads of school as well during the process. So over a 6-week period, we actually interviewed 52 middle and senior leaders across all the schools. I didn't do all the interviews. I think I'd probably be dead by now if I did. But I did the vast majority of them. So I personally did about 45 of them, I think. So most of them I did. And actually we were really surprised at the results. First of all, we were evaluating the WIGL as the tool. I think the evaluations of that were that it was really helpful in getting people to reflect on their practice. So essentially we used it as a self-evaluation tool, and it was the first time for some people that they truly reflected on all aspects of their leadership. So some people found it incredibly difficult and were very reticent to say whether they were meeting the standard or not. And other people were perhaps a little overconfident, shall we say, in that. But in the main, I think generally there was quite a good match between what they said about themselves and what we felt about them at the end of the process. I think what was surprising about it, and which we've done some thinking about retrospectively, was that though many of them had been on a variety of training courses, middle leader and senior leader training courses, they found it incredibly difficult to articulate the leadership skills they were using and applying in their everyday roles within the school. So even though many of them were in acting positions or already middle or senior leaders, they found it very difficult to say what leadership skills they felt were their strengths, where they were applying them. And I think also we found that they didn't really evaluate the impact of what they were doing. So when asked, well, you've described something you've done, what difference did it make? What impact do you think it had? In some cases, legitimately, they would say it's still a work in progress, I don't yet know. But in many cases, they talked about things that had been done rather than the difference it made. So they would say, I wrote the policy, or the policy is published. But they wouldn't say, the policy is making a difference in practice. And in some cases it probably was, but they weren't articulating that. So I think a lot of their role had sort of become quite checklisty. It's done, done, done. Yes, because sometimes when they described a project which they'd done as part of one of their programmes, actually it was very clear, goals, vision, and an evaluation of impact, but they weren't reapplying that in the other roles that they did. So typically a middle leader might have done a sort of standalone project as part of their course. Let's say they introduced a new way of a new policy for handwriting, let's say, something contained, and they could talk through that from beginning to end really clearly because they'd been taken through that process step by step. But when asked about their role as a year group leader, they couldn't go through the same process. So it was like they were learning the theory, applying the theory in one context, but weren't able to reapply it. I think it's because they couldn't see it within a continuum of skills. So, and also they became tied up with the actions rather than, for example, the vision and values of the school. So in almost every case, even with the projects they've done as part of their bigger projects, they didn't articulate that as any part of the school's vision or aims or the general direction of the school. They talked about it as a discrete thing that they were doing. And then I think they became very quickly subsumed into an action planning role, which was all about the actions rather than the reflection of their leadership on those actions. And I think that that is because they're not articulating what they're doing on a regular basis. So the missing links for me are a more reflective leadership learning process, which is continuous. And I think in part that's linked to using tools like the WIGL, where you can see where your gaps are for yourself and you can work on those and see what the next steps look like. And the second thing is that I think people need a process of mentoring and coaching so that on a regular basis they can sit down and talk through with somebody about their leadership, what they're finding challenging, what they're finding stimulating, and where they feel that they're making really good progress or not within developing those skills, so that people start to see themselves on a leadership continuum rather than doing a job. What we found was that having something to talk about certainly improved the quality of the conversation. If we had done those sessions without the people we were interviewing having completed a self-evaluation, we would have been talking in a very abstract way, whereas we were able to say, okay, so where does that fit within here? You know, you didn't highlight this, why do you think that's a skill that you haven't experienced? And it gives you a focus and a real shared language, I think, which was absolutely crucial to it. Yeah, and I think that's because I think there's also a responsibility for senior leaders. Because one of the things I said to the heads within this group of schools was, I think you're all rather swan-like. Now, many of them don't look like swans, but the reality is that I think senior leaders and head teachers in particular often feel like they have to look like they know everything and that it's not difficult. And when I've challenged them on that, I've said, you need to show the craft of your headship. You need to show the craft of your leadership. You need to continually articulate the rationale for why you're doing things and why you're doing things the way you are, so that the people who are sitting underneath you, who are going to pass that down the chain, if you like, can do the same. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is that head teachers feel that it's their job, as I say, to be the font of all knowledge. And I think we have to move away from that and say, distributive leadership, which is the model most schools are working in, actually requires a much more open approach to leadership, where we say, what are we collectively finding difficult in terms of leadership? How are we going to solve these problems? And what is our shared vision of what this might look like, rather than a more top-down model? I think at its very best, I think it's the ideal model, but I think this is a new place, if you like, for primary schools. We have some very, very large primary schools now, and I think those do not work unless you have a very good distributive leadership model, because primary school age children need to know that they are known, they are cared for, valued, by people at a highly responsible level within the organisation. There needs to be a hierarchy to manage behaviour, there needs to be a hierarchy that protects children, there needs to be a hierarchy that keeps the quality of teaching and learning at a good level continuously. And unless you have a really good distributive leadership model in a big primary school, it won't happen. I think in the schools that use it, I've seen some very, very powerful models of distributive leadership where Some of these schools, 5 forms of entry on 2 sites. Their deputy head teachers are phase group leaders, their assistant heads are year group leaders, and their year group leaders, actually have a significant degree of autonomy, but are very, very clear about their roles and their responsibilities and their remit, and they're all deadly ambitious. So everybody's aspiring upwards, so there's a real hierarchical sort of approach, and yet everybody sees themselves as being potentially moving up to the next level. I think so, and I think also they know that their colleagues working at the same level are all judged by the same standard, so they have confidence in one another. So when all the year group leaders get together, they know that they're all on a par, all working to the same expectations, all working to the same standard. So that regardless of the fact that somebody might be in foundation stage and somebody might be in year 6, the actual day-to-day job might have huge variations. The expectation of how they deliver on that job is matching, and so one's not doing more work than the other. So I think that leads to openness and sharing and a willingness to work together. But as I say, they're all looking at, well, and what does the next step look like? And because there's a match, they can see, actually, if I do this and this, I'm showing that I'm ready for deputy headship, and they can see that promotion. I have to say, in London schools, promotion is quick. So people are moving quickly through those leadership scales, and in 3 or 4 years you can be in a very senior position. But that means that those quality standards become even more important, because it means that you need to get those under your belt really quickly, and everybody needs to understand that they don't move on until they've acquired those skills. It's really designed to take you from the head teacher standards as nationally published, and then incrementally through deputy headship, assistant headship, and then a wide range of senior and middle leader roles. So those become very much more specific. So while head teacher, deputy head and assistant head teacher are a continuum, the other roles within the toolkit, probably forget a few if I start to list them, but the others are very specific to the role. So assessment lead, gifted and talented lead, year group leader, phase group leader, SENCO, inclusion coordinator, EMA coordinator, just trying to think if there are any others, subject leader, I think I said that, early years leader. All of those roles have different and specific descriptors. So not only do they help you to see where you are, but they also give you guidance of the expectation of what that role should entail and how that fits into and moves towards those senior leader positions. So they all follow a progression which takes you through those middle, senior, top level, if you like, leadership roles. Governors can use it for head teacher performance management. It's very good for setting goals. In fact, the whole thing can be used for setting goals around leadership and management. But what I would always say is that I think the essential element of what is good leadership is the self-evaluation, which underpins a dialogue. So I don't think that it's something that somebody should be using, if you like, to judge another person. I think it should be a mutual and discussive tool, if you like, so that somebody's evaluated themselves. A third party might have looked at it and said, actually, we think you're there, and it's the point of discussion between those two things that I think is absolutely the essence of what it's about.